Sven, could I ask you to mute your microphone, please? Thank you very much. For the benefit of the members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I'd like to explain who everybody is. It's 2 o'clock and we'll commence this virtual Development Control Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Paul Miller and I'm the chairman of the committee. The committee meeting is being held virtually in accordance with the council's rules for virtual meetings and reflect the recently public government regulations implementing the Coronavirus Act. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and will be available to view after the meeting is finished. Councillors who sit on this committee and who will be making the decisions on the applications before us are identified by name on the screen.
Hello.
Ward councillors addressing the committee will be introduced by name.
Oh, it's Andy. It's okay. I was.
Councillor McCormack, could you
Right,
mute
cheers.
your microphone, please? You're unmute. That's it. Thank you. Ward councillors addressing the committee will be introduced by name. Can I ask the officers who will be advising the committee to introduce themselves and their role?
Good afternoon, everyone. Mike Townsend, Planning and Development Manager.
Greg Chapman, Assistant Planning Manager.
Gemma Cox, Senior Planning Officer.
Emma Bethel, Solicitor, Legal Services.
Bernadette, Democratic Service Officer.
The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be assessing the material brought before us and listening to the representations made, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. In reaching these decisions, we are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. I understand that planning decisions can be emotive and ask that everybody remains polite and professional and patient throughout this meeting in case of any slight delay in presentations. Can I now remind both members and officers of some procedures that we'll be using in this virtual meeting? Unless speaking, officers will have their videos switched off to provide clarity as to who the committee members are for those watching and participating. At this point, can I ask all officers present to switch off their video? The officers present will only switch their video link on during the item they are presenting or where they wish to be invited to speak by me as chair. For this virtual meeting, councillors should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the Member Code of Conduct and ensure they are not disturbed during the meeting. Can members ensure that their mobile phones are now switched off or on silent? Can members of the committee turn their video link on during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they're invited to speak by myself? Members are reminded that if they switch off their video link or move away from the camera, they will be treated as leaving the meeting and will not be able to take part in any vote on the item under discussion. Members can indicate their wish to speak by raising their hand and should only speak when I as chair invite them to do so. When we move into debate of the application, may I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and to keep any comments on each item to a maximum of 4 minutes. As chair, I can confirm the name of any visiting speaker at the appropriate time in the agenda before they address the committee by audio link. Councillors who declare they are leaving the meeting and switch off the video link if they have an interest that they need to declare, or if they have predetermined an item on the agenda, they can switch off on their video link again when I call the next agenda item. Where a member of the committee has a predetermination position on an application and is registered to speak under the public speaking scheme, they will stand down from the meeting, will only be able to participate as a visiting councillor by audio link. They will then rejoin the meeting as a member of the committee once that application has been determined. At the appropriate time, I will invite speakers to contribute to the meeting by audio link in the order set out in the update paper, but I reserve the right to reorder the speaking in the event that technical difficulties occur. I will ask each speaker to confirm their name and their interest in the item before commencing their contribution. I would ask that points made by visiting speakers are material planning considerations relating to fact. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to keep points made on the application to material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning is finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. Voting will be taken by roll call, and I will confirm the recommendation that is to be voted upon before the voting begins. When each member unmutes their microphone to vote, can they leave a small pause before speaking to allow their vote to be heard? Can each member then indicate whether they are for or against the recommendation or whether they wish to abstain? Hopefully, we will not have any IT problems, but can I remind councillors that if their connection is lost, that they should immediately advise the Democratic Services Officer and use their meeting link to access the meeting again. Right, turn to the main agenda. And agenda item 1, apologies for absence and substitutions. I have recorded that Councillor Saunders has replaced Councillor Nick Robinson. I don't see any absences or other substitutions. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Leeks.
Hello, Chairman. Yes, I wish to declare an interest on item number 2, which is tennis courts at Tadley. I'm a trustee of the land and also on the Tadley Town Council.
So I take it, Councillor Leeks, you'll be withdrawing from the committee for that item.
I will indeed.
Thank you very much. Any more declarations of interest? No, there are no urgent items that have been presented to me. So we go on to the agenda item number 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of July. The minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of July will be approved at the Development Control Committee to be held on the 12th of August. Agenda item number 5, applications for planning permission. And item number 1, if I could ask Mr. Hipwood to join in and just hold fire until I call you, Mr. Hipwood, and Greg Chapman will introduce the item.
Thank you, Chairman. First application on the agenda is an application for the erection of 1 3-bedroom dwelling to support an existing rural equine business at land at Willow Grove, Newnham Lane, Old Basing. There is an update at page 17 that confirms the speakers for the application. There is no further written update. Thank you, Chairman.
Am I meant to be talking now? Hello?
Sorry, Chairman, your microphone it needs to be unmuted.
Apologies, I'll leave it unmuted. Mr. Hipwood, yes, you have 4 minutes from now to speak to the committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Oliver. I hope that you've seen the little video that we made.
Mr. Hipwood, could you hang on a minute? I have the development manager wishes to speak.
Sorry, Chair, and apologies to Mr. Hipwood for interrupting. I was just sense checking whether Miss Downey or Mr. Laster were joining this public speaking, because there was 4 down.
Yes.
And if they are, Chair, they would need to come in at this point as well. So they share 4 minutes.
Okay.
Ian is should be there somewhere.
Okay, let's start again. Let's have Mr. Hipwood, Ms. Downey, and Mr. Lassiter.
Correct.
I can see Ian Laster's on board.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Hipwood will be speaking first, and then I'll follow.
Fine. I'll take it as Mr. Hipwood and Mr. Lassiter. Afternoon, Ian. And you have 4 minutes.
Okay. Again, hello. I hope you all got to see the video that we made of Willow Grove, because no one had the opportunity due to COVID-19 to come and do a site visit. I've been at Willow Grove for 13 years now, since 2007, developing my equestrian business, retraining English thoroughbred racehorses, breeding and livery for my polo clients, teaching and general equestrian management. I'm delighted that the expert consultant acknowledged our need for accommodation on site for animal welfare and security reasons. Since there have been actually 2 more break-ins on Newnham Lane, and in one case about a month ago, the gates were smashed through, and the horses were actually let out of their fields, and they could have got onto the roads if they had been so inclined. In 2016, we were granted a lawful development certificate for the continued use of the land, equestrian breeding and training of the horses, and we normally have about 4 permanent members of staff, including myself and my partner Twiggy. We get to the yard about 7 o'clock in the morning, and we sometimes finish around 8 o'clock. And we employ seasonal staff, the bulk of the horses when they come into work in the summer. Although we do work in the winter, maybe we'll be at half in the winter. The business has got many different threads of income.
Hasn't got a mention.
Sorry. Oh, sorry, someone else was talking then. I don't know what happened. The business has got many different threads of income and is therefore a complex business for some people to understand. But in short, we support the local rural economy through employment and training of local staff, farriers, feed merchants, veterinary, local farms, metalworks and agriculture and machine repairs, muck removal, saddlers, and local mechanics. We currently commute 30 minutes each way, depending on traffic. My daughter has to be collected from school right in the middle of a working afternoon. So either Twiggy or myself collect her and bring her back to the yard and then take her home afterwards. Granting us permission will mean that my daughter, who is 11, and Twiggy, myself, and in future my father, who is in his mid-70s, can all live.
Ali, can I come in there, please?
Go for it.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to comment on the 3 recommended refusal reasons. Reason 3 is visual impact, and it is a very subjective matter. It was assessed by the landscape officer without the benefit of a site visit. I hope you found the video clip helpful. The dwelling would be sited within a dell, surrounded by trees and screened by the existing bund. So in my view, its visual impact would be minimal. Regarding flood risk, we have shown that the site is not within flood zone 3B as alleged. And on the top of page 38, your officers state the Environment Agency has confirmed that the proposed dwelling would be unlikely to result in increased flooding in the area, and the property itself should be safe for occupants during a flood event. So I don't consider there is a big flood risk issue here. Reason 1 is the policy reason, but it must be remembered that the quoted policies are out of date because of the housing delivery issue. Accordingly, the starting point is that permission will be granted unless the harm is so great as to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits.
You have half a minute.
Thank you. Notwithstanding your officer's recommendations, members are entitled to reach a different conclusion on the planning balance, particularly in the light of confirmation that there is an essential need in this case. Your officer's main concern is with the viability of the business, which has grown and thrived over 13 years. There is a reference of, sorry, I don't know, it's not explicit in the report, but I know Mike will confirm that since the publication of the NPPF in 2012, there is no national policy requirement to consider viability. You only have to consider need. This was confirmed in a High Court case in the case of Embleton.
Could I ask you to wind up, please, Mr. Lester?
Yeah, I'm a bit short here. Yeah, so your officers and the consultant who didn't visit the site or speak to the applicant have only applied the pre-2012 financial test and have not looked at the bigger picture to enable an assessment to be made of whether the enterprise
I
is
must ask you to finish up now, please, Mr. Lester. Thank you very much. Members, questions to the applicant. Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. On page 23, the last but one paragraph, it refers to the financial statements. These are for the years ending the 31st of March to the 30th of April 2015-17, and not the previous 3 years as required by the policy. Would the applicant like to state why that is so? Why the is not complying with SS6F Part 14?
This is Caroline Downey, Ian Laster's business partner, talking in regards to the financials. This application went in August 2018, and so that's why we're using 2017 accounts, and 2018 accounts are being finalised at the moment.
Any more questions to the applicant? No, thank you very much. May I ask Councillor Cubitt to come on board, please?
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Councillor. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members. Thank you for letting me speak. You will note I requested that this application be brought to your committee, and I humbly request that the committee reconsiders this application and that it should be approved by this committee. I visited this site earlier this year with Councillor Godison, and at that time we had been advised that this application was to be refused on the grounds of the negative impact on the landscape and its breach of policy EM1. My thoughts are, apologies, threefold. I would like to focus on the landscape, the welfare of the animals, and supporting our local rural economy. Landscape. As you all know, this application is for a 3-bed resi to be built within an enclave of an old pre-existing bund. You'll have seen the photographs earlier. I do not believe it breaches either EM1 or EM10. And having visited the site, I believe that this proposal would sit well within the site and that it clearly respects the existing setting. I also believe this development is sympathetic to the character and visual amenity of the landscape. Welfare of the animals. There is a theme throughout the papers that our officers and experts clearly accept that there is a proven need for on-site live-in accommodation. We appear to have a situation where we have a successful, thriving rural business which has grown over time. And it is evident that with this success, there is an essential need for this development to be approved. The vets have stated that the welfare of the horses and foals are clearly of vital importance, and that as this rural business has grown, this site must not be left unattended, as it is not good for the well-being of the horses. I would like to add that references are made throughout and weaved throughout this application, stating that the application fails to meet the policy requirements of the Old Basing Neighbourhood Plan 2015 to 2029. And yet the Parish Council did not object to this application. The map referred to on page 30, map 7, appears to be completely unrelated to this application and relates to Basingstoke Canal, which is nowhere near this application. And finally, I believe it is so important we support local rural businesses. There is clearly an identified need and no alternative accommodation in the locality as stated in the report. Moreover, we should be seen to be supporting our entrepreneurs in the borough. As you all know, under the NPPF, there is a presumption in favour of sustainable development. I believe this application, if approved, meets para 11D2, as this application demonstrates the benefits of approving this application are sizable and would result in maintaining the welfare of the horses, which has to be paramount, and importantly supporting a growing rural business. In this time of COVID-19, when many small, previously successful private companies are really struggling, we should use all tools available to support our local economy wherever possible and not throwing up more impediments. As per the NPPF states in para 78, we must be seen to enhance and maintain the vitality of rural communities. Para 79A, there is an irrefutable essential need for someone to live on site. And para 81D requires of us to be flexible enough to support and accommodate live-work accommodation to help our community build a strong competitive economy, which is now more important than ever. And finally, para 83 requires us to support a prosperous rural economy. In that context, I would very much request that the committee reconsider the response from the council and approve this application. Many thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, questions to the ward councillor? Nope. Okay, thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Members, questions to officers? Councillor Bound, followed by Councillor Potter and Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. The applicant mentioned, Mr. Laster, I think, actually mentioned that there was no need to be taking into account the viability aspect of this enterprise. Could the officers comment on that? Because there's a whole section on viability, which seems to suggest that the enterprise is not viable. I mean, what weight do we give to it?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, in terms of viability, it is part of our policy consideration under SS6F, and it is also set out within National Planning Practice Guidance from the government at page, which is at page 28, the first bullet point on page 28 of your agenda. That whether the enterprise will remain viable for the foreseeable future is a material consideration in the determination and the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Fine. Councillor Potter?
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if I could just talk to the officers about the view that's been expressed about the suitability of the design. I mean, I know this is always very subjective and it's difficult in a way to pose the right question, but I mean, from my analysis of the information I have available and the things that I've seen in terms of the design, which in my view resemble a traditional agricultural building in many ways, and the timber cladding, which clearly again gives it that sort of, I would have thought again, that rural yeah, sort of rural finish and appearance. I'm just amused really at the subjective rejection of it really as being a building which fits into the rural setting. And I just wanted to understand, if I may, I know the landscape officer was commenting on this, but could you just help me with the view that's eventually reached that said, no, it isn't acceptable as a design, please?
Thank you, Chairman. There's a couple of elements to it. First is obviously the amount of fenestration and the fact that it is a domestic property with chimneys. The balconies obviously don't assist. This is obviously summarised in the officer report. There's a domestic paraphernalia associated with the building as well, but also its height that it would be elevated above the bunds. Obviously, the introduction of residential built form into a rural context within what is an iconic view set out within the neighbourhood plan it isn't going to be a natural feature, although the degree of that harm is obviously for the decision takers and for the committee.
Can I just follow up? Obviously, I mean, the benefits of site visits we've known historically to be invaluable to us really, but in terms of the photographs that we've seen and the video that's provided, and I know Mr. Lassiter made reference to this, the opinion of the applicant is, and his agent, that this is set down in a way that obviously suggests that it is barely visible in terms of its final appearance, and certainly their subjective view is that the impact on the landscape would be minimal. And is that accepted in any way or not, or totally rejected as a view?
Thanks, Chairman. That's not the officer's view. No, the officer's view is that it is harmful to the landscape setting in terms of visual amenity and landscape impact. That's both by virtue of long range views and then the landscape impact, but by virtue of the impact from the footpath in more closer proximity as well. Obviously, there is a difference in opinion there in terms of the impact of the proposed built form, but that assessment of the built residential paraphernalia in the context of this equestrian use and the existing bund, which officers view as the presence of the existing bund with the dwelling in front of it as well, extenuates the impact of both. But as I said, that assessment from, as you said, the photos and the videos that you've got from the applicant are for the decision taker. So members obviously may take the view of the officers or may take their own view as well.
Thank you, Chairman, for now. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, basic question. Mr. Lassiter said he had evidence now that this property was not in flood zone 3B. So, question to the officers: who do we believe, or are you aware of this evidence to the contrary, and can you clarify where we stand? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think there's been lots of correspondence between the applicant and their agent and the Environment Agency and the case officer. The view of officers is that it's in flood zone 3, which is at the highest risk of flooding. The question as to whether it is in flood zone 3A or 3B, 3B being the functional floodplain, is only a view that could be reached based upon detailed modelling. That isn't a position that I understand, having reviewed the file, that has been finally determined. The precautionary principle is applied in that case, and we follow the flood zone 3B that's set out within the council's strategic flood risk assessment, and therefore the Environment Agency and officer view is that the site is within flood zone 3B, but in any event, flood zone 3A or flood zone 3 in itself overall is the highest risk of flooding.
Okay, thank you. That clears that. Thank you.
Councillor Saunders. You're still muted, Councillor.
I'm not. Just
there we are.
Yeah. If I might ask some clarification from officers, as I understand it, this would be a building which will be tied to the use as a accommodation for a worker on the surrounding equestrian activity. So supposing that that activity was to cease for whatever reason, whether it was financial or whatever, what then happens to the building? Is it then just available as a house in the countryside, or would it have to be tied to future equestrian uses, or would it have to be demolished?
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, first of all, obviously the application's recommended for refusal. So if obviously members are minded to look to grant permission, yes, it would be officer advised that a condition should be imposed to restrict the occupancy of the dwelling to one in that's occupied by an employee in equestrian or agricultural use. That does pose difficulty, obviously, with the enterprise, an officer's advice being that there's no evidence that, or there isn't sufficient evidence that the enterprise is viable as an ongoing entity. So if a condition were to be imposed, it does pose the question of what would happen to the dwelling, which is part and parcel of the reason for refusal. If obviously a condition were imposed, with members looking to, if the recommendation was overturned, and the dwelling was constructed and business did cease to exist, then I suppose at that point there would be a choice for the applicant as to whether how they would proceed, whether it would be one that they would look to sell, a property they'd look to sell to somebody else in agricultural or equestrian use, or whether they would rent it out, or whether they would look to have any such condition varied if there wasn't evidence of any need for an agricultural equestrian dwelling, and therefore you'd have an unrestricted dwelling in that case, if that was the case. But that's several steps in the future, I suppose. Thank you, Chairman.
No problem. Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just looking at this viability argument, I believe the applicant or their agent mentioned the fact that the reason they couldn't provide the most up-to-date accounts was because they were still basically looking at or preparing the 2018 accounts. Is that normal? Would we normally expect that sort of time lag? Because it does seem key to one of the arguments here about viability that these aren't available. Is that normal, or would we expect them to be available for that time period?
Thank you, Chairman. So just a point of clarification first, I know the agent referred to the application being submitted in August 2018. In actual fact, it was submitted in August 2019. I understand that requests have been made to the applicant for more up-to-date account details, but that they haven't been forthcoming.
No more questions? Then we move into debate. Who would like to kick off? Councillor Bound.
I'll kick off, Chair, certainly. I mean, I've listened to what the applicant has said, and it's quite disturbing, or perhaps it was the councillor to hear that these horses do need protection, and there's been a breaking down of fences and gates and so on. But to my mind, they haven't presented a sufficient case to go against the officer recommendation in terms of the viability. I cannot understand how we could possibly grant this application based upon what we have got in the report. It might be that newer accounts would swing us in a different direction, but at the moment I can't see that the viability assessment would swing me against the officer recommendation. And in terms of the flooding aspect of it, the design, I take what Councillor Potter says entirely. In terms of design, it's in the eye of the beholder, and maybe it does fit into a rural landscape from a certain perspective. But the fact that they've built it on stilts suggests to me that there must be some problem there in terms of possible flooding of the site. I have yet to hear the rest of the committee's deliberations here, but at the moment I am sort of leaning in the direction of the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Bound. Councillor Goodison, followed by Councillor McCormack. And then Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, it is in my ward, so if I may make a few comments. I think on the three refusals, reasons for refusal, can I say very briefly that, of course, we don't have a 5-year land supply, so that brings us down to the MPPF, and there is a presumption in favour of development in that document. Could I also point out that it has been commented that it's against the old Basing and Lichfield neighbourhood plan. I would just mention that the parish council did not have any objection. They sent their view into the borough officer saying they had no objection. So I repeat that the parish has no objection. I think on the flooding issue, which I think is obviously fairly important, and what I would like to say there is that I've lived on the Loddon since 1978, and last February we had 2 or 3 weeks, as many of you will remember, of very, very torrential rain. The river where I live was certainly higher than I've ever seen it before and was flowing very strongly. That was the time when Councillor Cubitt and I went up to look at the site. And I would say that despite all that heavy rain, which had been gone on for nearly 2 weeks, there was no sign whatsoever of any flooding on that particular site. Can I also, may I also, if I may, take you to the top of page 33, where it says, it is noted after a number of amendments to the flood risk assessment, the EA has confirmed that the proposed development would be unlikely to result in any increased flooding in the area, and the property itself would be safe for occupants. So I think this flooding issue can be over-egged, and I think in this particular case it has been over-egged. The risk of flooding there is very, very minimal. Reason number 3, that the proposed development is harmful to the character and appearance of the surrounding area. The comment I would make there is that there is if you look at the plan, there is a very, very large barn already on the site, a pretty unattractive barn. There is a smaller barn next to it. At the end of the proposed 3-bedroom building, there is another small foaling barn, and the building itself is set down slightly, and is surrounded by a bund on one side or 2 sides, and trees on the other 2 sides, which I understand the applicant has every intention of retaining. So its impact on the landscape is very, very minimal. In conclusion, I would like to take you to SS6, which states, as you will all know, that the development of new housing will only be permitted where they, and I take you down to F, for a new building linked to an existing and viable agricultural, forestry, horse breeding, training, blah, blah, blah. And it needs to be shown that there is an essential need for the occupant to be on site at any time during the 24-hour period. I think if we go to page 22, you will see the contents of a letter produced by the vet, who makes it perfectly clear that it's in the nature of this particular business, it's very, very necessary to have people on site during foaling time and to look after the welfare of a very expensive number of horses for their general welfare. And if I could also quote...
Yeah, Councillor Goodison, you've had a good time on this one, and you were concluding a few minutes ago. So could you bring this to an end, please?
Yeah, okay. I'll just, if I may just make the last quote, that whilst on page 28, whilst the necessity for a rural worker to live at site has been found, it has not been demonstrated that the enterprise is currently viable and will remain so for the foreseeable future. I think that demonstrates that it's accepted that a rural worker should be on site. And in another, very, very finely, in another section, it states that the independent agricultural consultant has confirmed that in his view there are no other available sites within the area which could be occupied. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Goodison. Councillor McCormack, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm not sure if that was a move, but if it's not a move, then I'm happy to move approval based on the reasons outlined by Councillor Goodison. Councillor Cubitt also mentioned it meets national policy paragraph 11B2 of the national policy framework. The thing that swung me was the vet's letter, page 22, the agricultural consultant, page 23. I don't think it's a breach of local policies EM1 and EM10, but that's a matter of interpretation. And looking at the reasons for, or the proposed reasons for refusal, I think there is an exception to our general policy. I think that it's quite a proven case in that regard. It is a viable business. The flooding, we're looking at a greater than 1 in 100 year risk of flooding. And again, I think that is a matter of interpretation. So I'm happy to move it, or if it's already been moved, I'm happy to second it.
Okay, I'm going to let Councillor Potter and Councillor Saunders have a very quick input into this before we move to that. Councillor Potter?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, had Councillor McCormack not said what he said, I would have moved the acceptance, the support for this application. I must admit, just very quickly, I mean, I'm always amazed at the process that applicants of this nature have to go through regarding financial viability. I'll be frank with you, I'm not sure how many businesses could come forward at this extreme moment with viable business plans for the future that we're all going to be facing. But certainly, looking at the report in the whole, and it's 30 pages, if I hadn't looked at the recommendation, I'd have expected a different conclusion, I'll be frank with you, because I think the case is well made and justified. I think it satisfies SS6 subsection F, I think it is, isn't it? And I think also probably I could find reason under EM1 and EM10, which I think were mentioned by Councillor Cubitt. But all in all, I think this business should be supported. I think it will be better supported with on-site security being provided. I don't find the dwelling incongruous in the local landscape. I mean, I know it's a subjective view, and I'm very happy to second the proposal from Councillor McCormack, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Chair. I, in my gut, want to support this application. It's very clear that accommodation on site for people working with the horses and looking after the horses is essential. And anybody who's worked with horses would know how important it is to have that kind of attendance day and night. The concern, and I'd also be very keen to support a local business to get going. The concern has to be the failure to produce any worthwhile accounts for the last few years. Any business, you should at least be able to produce management accounts, even if you couldn't produce audited accounts, know where it stands. And there is an alternative solution, which is to put a temporary building on site to provide the accommodation, to provide the oversight of the animals, until such time as that financial wherewithal is produced. Otherwise, we're the ones who are being asked to take the punt on this rather than the applicant. So I really am in a difficult situation at the moment of which way to go.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. It's been moved and seconded for approval. Councillor McCormack, I'm going to specifically ask you, and then we'll refer back to officers, your reasons for approval.
I think there is a proven need for it, and I will quote from what other councillors already mentioned. National policy framework paragraph 11b2, SS6 subsection 7, and our conflicting interpretation of whether or not it's in breach of policies EM1 and EM10. Other councillors have mentioned their belief that it would be compliant with those. So I'll offer those policy reasons. And I think it's also been demonstrated from the vet's letter and the agri-consultant that the volume of the business, you know, I'm convinced of its sustainability. I hadn't picked up on the fact that they hadn't filed accounts, but you know, that wasn't something that I had considered, and I don't think that should be held against them.
Okay. Mike, any comment? I've got a question, because normally in this, or as has been common in the situation when we don't have a 5-year land supply, some of our policies tend to fall. And I've noted in the reasons for refusal, the MPPF has been taken as the reasons and not so much our policies. So it's the weight, and this is where I'm asking advice from the officers. We're mentioning for a positive from our own policies, but should the weight be applied to the MPPF? That's where I'd like, and are those reasons sufficient, Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I can deal with the that first question first, and then I'll come back to the reasons put forward for this first vote, if you like, because I understand it's been moved and seconded at this time.
Correct.
For approval. So in relation to the weight of the policies, you're absolutely right, because the council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply as detailed in the report, then there's limited weight to be given to those policies. Nevertheless, it's not no weight, and effectively the need for on-site provision is material, both in the policy and in the MPPF. I think the issue here is where it comes down to the interpretation of viability, and as the report sets out, following on from the MPPF requirements in demonstrating the need for development, for rural workers dwelling, the National Planning Policy Guidance, so just to be clear, the MPPG then sets out the need to demonstrate there's some confidence that there would be an ongoing business. So I think that point around viability is key and does need to be borne in mind when members come to their decision as to whether they feel that this is an appropriate development for a permanent dwelling ongoing. I think that's the key part here, that at this stage, the officer's report is effectively saying that it's not been demonstrated at this point with that up-to-date information to enable us to get to a point where we consider that there is that ongoing ability to demonstrate viability. Nevertheless, in terms of the reasons for approval, it appears to be that the key driver is the need. If I've understood Councillor McCormack's key point, really is it's about the need. It sounded as if it was to do with this sort of exceptional case of this particular business because of the number of horses involved and the animal welfare associated with that. So I think that would almost be the sort of first reason for approval, if I could put it that way. I think in relation to flood risk, again, I'll sensitive this with Councillor McCormack, but if I understood it, it was more to do with the, I suppose, again, thinking about the exceptional need that's been put forward in that first reason for approval, and ultimately it would come down to the design of the building in this particular case. So that would be the second reason, because you can't avoid the fact that it is within flood zone 3. So that part is clear. So I think it'd be those first two reasons for approval. And then the third reason for approval would effectively be that the motion is relying on the fact that the landscape impact is not considered to be harmful. And then when taken as a whole, all of those issues are considered to not demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So I think those would be the encapsulating, if I've understood Councillor McCormack's motion correctly, the key reasons for approval on that vote, Chair.
Fine. You happy with that, Councillor McCormack?
Yes, Chair, I am.
Yeah.
On that basis, Councillor Potter, you've seconded the motion.
I have, Chairman. I just wanted a point of clarification. It seems to me, obviously, I understand the importance of the viability of the business itself, but if we are able to impose the type of condition that people have mused about up to now in regard to the use of the building that's being proposed, and we find it an acceptable design, you know, all of that debate now having been covered. If that is then restricted and it links to this business, it seems to me it is the applicant who is taking the chance in regard to the costs of putting this property where it is, and the future remains around them, doesn't it, in terms of making their business work. If that ceases, then there are all the restrictions that we would impose by that condition, and putting it on the line, I mean, we have a rural dwelling that no harm can come from really in regard to its design. It will either stand as a residential dwelling that's going to be used in terms of a future business on that site, or not, quite frankly, or will become moribund. I mean, I think the risk is with the applicant, not ourselves.
Yes, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think that's effectively that's the key point here, isn't it? It's the confidence that, yeah, will that condition effectively be reasonable given the information within the application? I think that's the key point being considered. Chair, I just wonder whether it's worth officers explaining what conditions would be recommended should the application go to approval, so that when that vote is taken, it's taken in the totality of those reasons for approval and the list of conditions. So if I could ask Greg to come in with that list of suggested conditions that can be encapsulated within the vote, Chair.
Absolutely, if you would do so.
Thank you, Chairman. I would suggest conditions in respect of the development to be carried out in accordance with the approved plans, the time limits of 3 years for implementation of the planning permission, details of the external materials, details of hard surfacing and soft landscaping, details of any boundary treatments. The development is to be carried out in accordance with the recommendations and mitigation methods suggested within the flood risk assessment. Securing the details contained within the arboricultural assessment, again, including mitigation measures there. Securing wildlife protection and mitigation measures. Requiring biodiversity habitat enhancement details, which is the only condition that's recommended as a pre-commencement condition, so would need to be agreed with the applicant or their agent prior to any decision needing to be issued, and so there would have to be a delegated to the head of planning for that to occur. Details of cycle parking facilities, details of water use to ensure that it uses water in a sustainable way. Removal of permitted development rights in respect to visual impact, trees, and retaining the appropriate use of the dwelling for a rural worker rather than it becoming an overly large dwelling. External lighting restrictions in respect of protected species and landscape impact. And then obviously the key one, part and parcel of the discussion, is restricting the use for a rural worker, again, through condition. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. It's been moved and seconded for approval for the reasons that have been explained and for the conditions to be explained. I'll go through the committee by roll call, and it will be for the motion to approve, against or abstain. Councillor Court.
Against.
Councillor Leeks.
For.
Councillor Saunders.
For.
Councillor Goodison.
For.
Councillor George.
For.
Councillor Frankham.
For.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormack. For. Councillor Bound.
Against.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Tomlin.
For the motion.
And I will vote against. That is carried. Bernie, would you give the count?
Yeah, 9 for the recommendation and 3 against.
Thank you. Officers?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm that application is granted planning, or is the resolution is to grant planning permission subject to the planning conditions and subject to the agreement of the pre-commencement condition. which would be delegated to the head of planning, and then planning permission subsequently for the erection of 1 3-bedroom dwelling to support an existing rural equine business. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Move on to item number 2, which is the tennis courts in Tadley. And if I could ask Ms. Barry to come online, please. Thank you very much. And if you'd just like to hang fire, I'll get the officers to introduce the application. I'll come back to you in a minute.
Thank you, Chair. Item 2 seeks planning permission for the installation of 10 lighting columns at the site of the former tennis courts on Tadley Common Road. The submitted supporting information states that it's proposed to switch the lighting off at 10 p.m. and that's been confirmed by the applicant. As the members will be able to see on the plans included within the agenda on pages 55 and 56, the tennis courts are located to the southwest of Tadley Common Recreational Ground. It's understood that the surface has recently undergone a surface upgrade for its use as a multi-games area following the approval of planning permission in 2008. And it's also prudent to note that the site is surrounded by Pamber Forest and Silchester Common, site of special scientific interest. If I could please draw members' attention to the update paper. It's just an officer note there to note that there's a discrepancy within the agenda report in relation to the distances to the neighbouring properties on page 51. To clarify, the nearest residential property along Broad Halfpenny Lane is located 47 metres to the southwest of the site, and Tadley Common School is located approximately 42 metres to the east of the site, where there are also residential uses. The application has been brought to the Development Control Committee at the request of Councillor Carruthers for the reasons set out within the agenda on page 47. The application is recommended for refusal due to substantial noise impacts to neighbouring dwellings.
Thank you very much. And if I could ask Ms. Barry to present her case, and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. I am speaking on behalf of the trustees of the Terbury Allotment Charity. We urge you to approve our application. The trustees thought very carefully about their decision to improve the multi-use games area, also known as a mugger for short, and only did so after consulting residents online. The positive feedback and support we received was overwhelming. The recent upgrade we have made to the mugger has proved very popular with our residents, in particular with local tennis clubs and training groups, and we have received many compliments from users. Our application to install lighting only to be on in the evenings from October until March is to extend the use of the area to more of our residents. For example, local scout and guide groups have indicated they would make use of the area, as has the Priory School opposite, which is a school for children with moderate to severe learning difficulties, specifically those with autistic spectrum disorder. In addition, there are some residents who can only exercise in the evening due to their work demands, and it would be a shame not to afford them use of this facility during the dark evenings. The installation of lighting would not only extend the use of the facility, it would also increase the safety of the users. Concerns have been raised by neighbouring residents regarding antisocial behaviour. Since lockdown restrictions were lifted, the mugger is being well used. We believe the high level of use by several groups has resulted in the area being self-policed. Notwithstanding that, if we are granted permission for the lighting, CCTV will be installed at the same time. Note, the police have confirmed the mugger is not an antisocial behaviour hotspot. We can understand the concerns of the neighbours, but we feel the issue of any noise impact to neighbouring properties would be minimal, bearing in mind that windows and doors tend to be closed during the cooler and darker months of the year. At the very start of this project, we visited a similar facility in Fulham, which is enclosed on 3 sides by 6-storey flats. This facility has lighting and is well supported by the adjoining residents. Antisocial behaviour is not an issue. On the 30th of June, the planning officer indicated that the placing of a condition restricting the proposed lighting to be switched off at 1900 hours could overcome the concerns raised by adjoining residents. Unfortunately, due to being a charity, there was not enough time for all of the trustees to consider this, as the deadline for a response was noon on the 1st of July. Those that did respond thought that 1900 hours was too early, bearing in mind the skate park opposite has the lighting on until 2200 hours, as does the football facility, which is just 180 metres away from the Mugger.
You've got about a minute left.
Okay, this current pandemic has highlighted the importance of outside exercise space, and surely we should be doing all we can to encourage and facilitate the use of recreational spaces like this. The mental health, well-being and physical fitness of people is of paramount importance to us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions to the trustee members? No, Councillor Bound.
Yes, just one brief question, Ms. Barry. The lighting would presumably be directed downwards onto the Mugger areas, and therefore wouldn't intrude too much into the outlying areas. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
No more questions. Thank you very much, Ms. Barry. Could I ask Councillor Vokes to come online, please?
Hello.
Hello, Councillor Vokes. Welcome.
Thank you.
And you have 4 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this application. The purpose being to extend access to these excellent community facilities as much as possible during the winter months of October through to March. Having read the papers and walked the area, there are no issues with the lights themselves. It is the potential noise disruption during the winter months which remains the concern, and that the lights would remain on until 10 p.m. While I appreciate the concerns of the residents, the suggested solution of an acoustic wall surrounding the facility would, in my opinion, look awful and make the whole facility feel enclosed and claustrophobic all year round. Less people would use it. Concerns are also raised about the potential of antisocial behaviour. There have been no recorded complaints about noise or ASB at the Mugger. CCTV would be installed at the same time as the lights, a useful deterrent and source of information to support dealing with any ASB behaviour should any arise. The lights will not be used from April to September to protect the local bat population, so this application will not change the current use of this facility for those 6 months of the year. Reading the report from Sound Planning, playing of music for dance and exercise classes has been identified as the main issue, creating the most noise and change in noise. Section 7.1 of the Sound Planning report shows a predicted sound increase of 5.4 decibels, from 42 to 47.4 decibels in the evenings. This is below 50, which is therefore deemed acceptable against the evaluation criteria World Health Organization 2000 Community Noise Criteria and British Standard 8233 for noise for buildings, as shown in Table 724 in the report. It is the subjective response evaluation and the rise of just over 5 decibels against the IEMA noise change criteria, which is the threshold between a low adverse effect and significant effect, which tips this into being a sound concern. Having read this report and observed the situation on the ground, I agree that playing loud music in the evenings could be disruptive to households living near to the Mugger. Therefore, a planning condition could be to ban music being played at the Mugger at any time, which would be easier to enforce than restricting to particular times of days. The facility can then still be used for all other types of activities. Regarding the light staying on until 10 p.m, this reflects the lighting timing at the skate park. But respecting the closeness of some households to the Mugger and tennis court, I believe an earlier cut-off time of 9 p.m. would be a good compromise, enabling evening clubs and individuals to use the facilities after school and work. This would also reflect best practice for many tennis courts in residential areas. My understanding from the applicants is that both of these conditions would be acceptable. The benefits of extending the use of the Mugger and tennis court are considerable. For example, the Tadley Youth Hub involves young people who are often the ones who are unlikely to go to Scouts and Guides and need the kind of small group organised play which the Mugger offers. For example, two-touch five-a-side football. It gets them running around, everyone has a go, whatever their ability, and keeps them engaged and busy, rather than being tempted into less constructive activities around the town. To hire space at schools, such as the Hurst, is not affordable, so these activities are forced to stop in the winter. Tadley has a high population of children and adults with learning disability and autism. These are vulnerable people who often have high levels of anxiety and very modest incomes. The Mugger offers an environment which supports their needs for supervised play and games without incurring costs. I believe extending the use of the Mugger and tennis court will help so many people with their mental and physical health and well-being, particularly those who may not be able to access games and sports facilities in any other way during the winter months. Please approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Any questions for the ward councillor? I've got one. Councillor Oakes, are there any other tennis courts in Tadley that have lighting systems?
There may be across the border, but there are no other tennis courts available whatsoever in Tadley and no community courts.
Thank you very much. Any more questions for the councillor? Nope, thank you very much. And I'd like to call Councillor Carruthers, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Councillor Carruthers, you have 4 minutes, starting now.
Right, good afternoon. I am ward councillor for the area in which this application is located, and I'm also a long-term resident of the Tadley area. It was myself who brought this application to committee. And I'd just like to point out that the images that we've seen today of the tennis courts are very out of date. And obviously, normally you would have had a chance to go and have a look. So they didn't really quite give it justice. The value of outdoor facilities has been highlighted to us over the last few months. We often hear it spoken of that there isn't enough for young people to do. And sometimes this issue is associated with antisocial behaviour. In Tadley, we're very fortunate. We have a skate park just across the road from the site, which we are here to discuss today. And we have more than one location with outdoor gym equipment. These are not lit. Much of this has been due to the efforts and investment from Tadley Town Council and their continuous efforts to address the needs of Tadley residents. It was Tadley Town Council who recently renovated the multi-use games area that we are here to discuss today. I have visited this facility on a number of occasions, and I hope by now that members of the committee have some familiarity with this fantastic space. I have visited this facility on a number of occasions. As a mum to 4 children between the ages of 8 and 14, there is something there for all of them. It is a safe, well-equipped space, and I'm delighted to say that every time I have been there, it has been being used respectfully and appropriately, whilst providing a safe space for the users to socialise and exercise. At present, it is light until around 9:30 p.m, possibly even 10 p.m. Therefore, I should expect that there will be people using the Mugger until around this time, if not later. The Mugger is not locked at night, therefore there is nothing to prevent it being used later, and the warmer temperatures will no doubt allow people to stay for longer. All the while, local residents are likely to have their windows open due to the summer temperatures. In the midst of winter, it can get dark as early as 5 p.m, a whole 4 to 5 hours prior to our current summer evenings. School finishes around 3:30. This renders the facility almost inaccessible in the winter months for sports and activity use for weeknights for young people. Of course, at this time of year, residents will generally have their windows closed. There is nothing to prevent people from entering in the dark and gathering. After all, everybody carries a torch and music around with them these days in the form of a mobile phone. By providing lighting to this facility, it would mean that it is accessible for its intended use during winter evenings. I've spoken to representatives from some of our local scouting and youth sporting groups in Tadley. These groups meet on weekday evenings, commencing their meetings between 5:30 and 7:30 p.m.
You have 1 minute.
If lighting was provided, it would allow such groups to utilise the space for activities during the winter evenings. The lighting would therefore increase appropriate use and in the meantime help prevent the possibility of any less appropriate gatherings in this space. At present, the application is for the lights to be on until 10 p.m. However, having spoken to Tadley Town Council, I'm aware that they will be willing to have a conversation about the timing of the lights in an attempt to find an arrangement that is agreeable from a planning perspective while still enhancing what this facility can offer to local residents. It is also the case that any upper time limit placed on the lighting does not mean that the lights always have to stay on until this time. If, for example, it was the case that it became apparent that for any reason it may be beneficial to consider having the lights on for less time, then Tadley Town Council could monitor the situation and have further conversations with residents around this. I am not dismissing the concerns of the residents of Broad Halfpenny Lane. I've taken care to walk around the area on a few occasions. There is currently a good density of deciduous trees between that closest property and the Mugger itself. Although I appreciate that these trees may not offer as much sound protection in the winter months, I do not foresee that the Mugger will be used to the same capacity as it currently is in the summer months. Even with lighting, it is likely to be used by smaller numbers and not as late due to cold and wet weather. I also feel that the benefits this enhancement will bring to residents is considerable. If this application were approved, then in my role as local councillor, I would work to play my part by increasing awareness of the facility within local organised groups to encourage good, appropriate, well-supervised use of the facility. I do appreciate concerns over noise. However, if conditions were put in place around the playing of music and there was an open dialogue between local residents and Tadley Town Council around any concerns over the facility, then I am sure that the lighting could be a very successful addition to the Mugger without inconveniencing the neighbouring properties. Members, please consider the approval of this application.
Thank you very much, Kerry. Members, questions for the ward councillor? No? Thank you very much, Councillor Carruthers. Members, questions to officers? Councillor Saunders. Councillor George.
There we go. Perhaps officers could just clarify for me. The conditions on the hours which can be operated, it sounds as if we've had several suggestions that different people would be prepared to accept other things and the town council might want to think about it with other people. Presumably, if we approve this application, we have to put the condition on now as to what hours we would find acceptable for that to operate. Now, does the fact that the skate park close by operates till 10 o'clock have any bearing on this? Or could we, for instance, say that the tennis courts could be 9 o'clock, the skate park could be 10 o'clock? What flexibility do we have if we are able to indeed put those kind of conditions on?
Thank you. Yes, members could obviously, if they decided to grant permission, then they would have to decide what the appropriate time restriction would be on any lighting. In respect of the skate park, that is addressed within the other matter section within the report. The skate park itself is further away from the nearest neighbouring properties to the tennis courts. So I think in this case, a difference in hours wouldn't necessarily be unreasonable if members decided to go that way. One thing that I would note is that the noise impact assessment that's been submitted does identify that evening noise would be substantial. So I think if that's just something to consider for members as to what time limit would be appropriate there.
Is that okay, Councillor Saunders? Yeah.
No, that's fine. That clarifies it very clearly, and I shall I think, be moving to approve in due course when we get to debate.
Okay, Greg Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just add to something that Gemma has commented on. If different hours are wanted to be imposed by the committee from what the applicant has requested, and officers did go back to the applicant to ask whether 7 o'clock might be agreeable. And the applicant had come back and said no in that respect. So if different hours from what are requested by the applicant are what members want to take forward, then we would need to delegate that really to the head of planning, because that's not what the applicant's proposal is. So we'd need to reach agreement with the applicant for any amended hours from what they proposed, if that's what members want to do with an hours condition. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you very much for that. I've got a series of speakers coming up. I've got Councillor George, Councillor Potter, Councillor Tomlin, Councillor Bound. Everybody else? Right. Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. One of the, as mentioned, I think by Councillor Saunders, one way of tackling this may be, given the substantial noise impacts which have been identified, is time frame, but also as types of activities. And I'm just wondering, in terms of reading the report, it seems to be particularly music for use in terms of dance routines and exercise, which seems to be probably the driving factor on this. I don't think sort of kicking the balls around is going to generate lots of noise, etc., etc. Could you please explain what is the key use which may give rise to this heavy noise, and should we not be considering, given troubles by really reducing the amount of time, lights 7 o'clock in the evening, where it only means that we're going to have them for a very short time of the year. They're only going to be useful for that period. So could we not consider putting a condition on use rather than time? And is it basically the playing of loud music which is a key driver here? Thank you.
Thank you. The noise impact assessment does actually identify that the use of the multi-use games area, even excluding exercise classes, that the evening noise impact would be substantial when compared to current ambient noises. And also it does identify that the noise is likely to arise from the site for a variety of different sports, such as tennis, football, basketball. Exercise classes is obviously noted within that, but I think it's important that even in the absence of exercise classes happening, that the noise impact assessment does identify that there would be an adverse impact in terms of noise. Does that answer your question? Sorry, Councillor George.
Yes, it does. It answers the question, but I must admit, given it's surrounded by trees, I'm quite surprised at that. And 50 metres away, it does seem, kicking a football around or playing tennis or what have you is going to give rise 50 metres away when it's surrounded by trees. I haven't read the noise report in detail, but I am very, very surprised by that.
Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Just picking up on that point, Councillor George, because I this come up at a number of meetings, I think, about sort of the impact of vegetation, I guess, in relation to noise. And I think the key message from my understanding of discussing with environmental health officers in the past is that vegetation itself doesn't create a great deal of noise barrier. I appreciate it will have quite a visual impact in the summer months in terms of reducing lighting, etc., but it doesn't have a huge amount of impact in terms of noise. And I think in part it's to do with the sort of types of intermittent noise that you would get from these sorts of activities in those sort of later hours, I think, is the key issue. But clearly a matter for the committee to debate and come to a value judgment on based on all the things they've heard and read in the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. I think it must be accepted that muggers create some noise, really, but listening to the local councillors, quite frankly, it seems to be a facility that's well liked, well used and well supported by the local community, and I think that stands this application in good stead. On the narrow point only of the lights, it just seems to me all we need to impose as a condition is something around shall remain on no later than 10 o'clock at night, and that seemed, I think, from what Councillor Carruthers was saying, probably to find favour really, and it would be done by local interpretation if there was no need for the lights to be on after 9 one night because of no booked usage, etc. I'm not quite sure how all this is going to be controlled, but it would be that sort of flexibility. So I think, you know, the outline of when the lights can remain on to would be sufficient in itself, would it not?
That's a question to officers. Officers.
Oracle in a way,
Sorry. Yeah. So if councillors were minded to grant planning permission, then yes, they would have to do. I would suggest that they consider what the appropriate hours would be, and as contained within the report, the environmental health officer has suggested that 7 p.m. would be the appropriate cut-off time.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Brief one regarding the lighting. Obviously timed, it will go off at 10 o'clock or whatever hours we said. Can we make it a condition that the lighting will automatically go off if there's no use, so that we don't see that it's just on for the sake of it? Because I don't know how they're going to control it unless someone keeps looking at the place or visiting the place. But whether we could condition, if not in use, it senses and turns itself off. Thank you.
Mike or Greg might want to come in on this, but I would have thought that would be difficult to impose a condition on.
Greg.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. In terms of being able to impose a condition to require them to automatically switch off, no, I don't think that's something we'd be able to impose. The condition that I think is being discussed in terms of the hours of use would be to protect the amenity of residents from prolonged hours of use into the evening hours, and so the mechanism by which the lights go on and off isn't relevant to that particular hours of use condition. It would be very difficult for the enforcement colleagues and officers to then enforce as well. I'm not sure it could be practically enforced. Just on another point, with respect to the hours, I think members some members have mentioned up to 10 o'clock. Gemma's come back and mentioned the Environment Health Officer has suggested 7 o'clock. That 7 o'clock suggestion has been put to the applicant, who has rejected that as a possibility. That is not something that they feel would be suitable. Their proposal is up to 10 o'clock. So as previously, unless members are minded to impose a condition in respect of 10 o'clock hours, if that were to be how the debate then goes, any difference from that would need to be agreed with the applicant, and so would need to be delegated to officers, but noting that they have already declined 7 o'clock, which is what the Environment and Health officers want. So if it was 7 o'clock, arguably we'd still be looking at refusal of the application. If it was something in between, then it would have to be officers going back to the applicant. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Tomlin.
Yeah, I just think we're missing an opportunity here. I don't see it beyond the wit of man to have a request for lighting to be automatic. That's all I'm requesting. Nothing about people policing it or enforcing it. It's just the design of the lighting. Given this day and age and our energy conservation, I think it'd be appalling if we were just to let it stay on for no apparent reason. Thank you.
Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sure the applicant and the trustees would obviously be minded to try and ensure energy conservation themselves, but in terms of our own policy considerations, there is no policy that would directly require that in respect of the hours of use. I would suggest if that is how members are minded to go, that it may well be worth putting an informative note on to that effect.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Are we still in questions or are we in debate?
We're in questions to officers.
Okay, I was just wondering about, I mean, it strikes me that the distance between the skate park and the cottage on page 55, the map there, is no different than that between the mugger and the cottage. It must be about the same, and that stays open to 10 o'clock at night. Am I correct?
Thank you. The skate park is 77 metres from what's labelled as the cottage on that location plan, whereas the tennis courts are 42 metres.
Then the map must be way out of scale then. That doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, Councillor Brown, because I have to agree with you. I saw that and then read the update paper, and I couldn't make any sense of it either. Sorry, Gemma.
That's quite all right. I mean, those measurements are taken from the scale plan. That's obviously to the cottage, to the dwellings on Broad Halfpenny Lane. The skate park is obviously significantly further away from those residents than the sports court. So the skate park is 143 metres from the nearest property on Broad Halfpenny Lane, whereas 47 metres for the tennis courts.
Thank you very much. Right. Now we're going to go into debate, and I'm going to pitch in first because in my own ward here, we've got a Muga. And one of the biggest points of discussion, and this was a Hampshire County Council application because it's within a school, but it's very close to residential property. And the arguments went back and forth about noise, lights, timing, everything else. I'll come back to Councillor Tomlin's suggestions. And what they do, notwithstanding that the management of the court is slightly differently managed the way that this one would be, is that there's a timer switch. It does go off at a certain time. It goes off, but until that time, anybody going to the court dials in a timer for the length of time that they plan to be on the court, and it automatically switches off after an hour, after 45 minutes, or whatever. If they stay on a bit longer, they just wind the timer back again, and the timer would go off anyway at whatever time is set for that court. It doesn't matter how much they put the timer on it, it wouldn't work. It has a finite cutoff time. Say it's 9 o'clock, say it's 10 o'clock, or whatever. They can't extend the lighting time past that time. So that's two things: energy conservation. It goes off when the users don't want it anymore, and it's a finite duration anyway. It works very well. The other point was noise. I would think that this Muga is probably within 50 feet, not yards, meters or whatever else. It's probably a third closer, or 2/3 closer than this one is to the residents in Tadley, the closest residents in Tadley. There has not been one complaint in 6 years for noise, and they're able to use this in the winter under controlled fashion under lights. So I offer that as part of the debate, and I'll open it up to Councillor Saunders to start with, and Councillor Potter and Bound.
Thank you, Chair. As previously advertised, it is my intention to move approval for this. I'm a bit bemused by the argument about noise, because why is the noise acceptable in the summer when everybody's got their windows open, but all of a sudden it ceases to be acceptable in the winter? That cannot make sense. I entirely take your point about and also Councillor Tomlin's point about the ability to control things with modern electronics, and you can control things. Even, dare I say, you could control it over the web if you needed to. There's plenty of ways of managing that so that we don't waste electricity, have unnecessary light pollution, but still provide the facility for people to use when they want to use it. I think the only question is, what should a reasonable cutoff time be? The trouble is that the noise doesn't stop when the lights go out. People hang around, they chat, they make noise going home. I would suggest that something between 9 to 9:30 is a more reasonable time for people to stop their games any less than that, and you're not really providing any benefit to the local community in terms of availability of the item, of the thing. So I think something around that, I'd suggest probably 9:30 curtain on that, with the lights go out whether you like it or not, would be acceptable if officers could negotiate that, and I would be very surprised if the applicant wouldn't accept that as well. And on that basis, I would like to move approval.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Potter, and I've got you down to speak anyway, but as you seconded it, would you like to make your comments now?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, formally seconding Councillor Saunders' proposal, if I may. Just very quickly, if I may, I mean, in regard to the plan that's provided for us, which I presume is a 1:1 1250 scale, I mean, if it counts for anything, the point that Councillor Bound makes is exactly right. I mean, the distance that scales from the corner of the skate park to the dwelling known as the cottage, as against that from the corner of the tennis court, the distance from the skate park is less than from the tennis court. I mean, you know, quite frankly, the point's been made. If the lights from the skate park create no issue, then I don't think these will either. And the point that Councillor Tomlin makes, I know it can't be imposed as a condition perhaps, but is a valid one really. Surely it isn't beyond, and it certainly won't be beyond the wit of Tadley, I know Tadley people, to have some form of sensor mechanism in lights. If there is no activity for X amount of time, the lights go out, but with the defined outside limit of that being 10 p.m. at night. Now, you know, as we've said, in terms of our commitment to climate change, we come back to this all the time, really, not wanting to use power and have lights on for the sake of it. Surely that's the sort of provision that could be made, and everybody, I think, would be content with that, really. But I second Councillor Saunders' proposal, and I'd like to see this approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Bound, do you have any additional comment?
I think Mike was going to say something. Mike Townsend was going to say something then.
Oh, Mike, sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Bound. It was just to provide that comment on the motion. So it sounds like the motion's been put forward on the basis of the condition of 9:30, which has been explained.
Yes.
Then go back to the applicant on if that was then voted through. I think picking up on Councillor Potter's point and Councillor Tomlin's point around the sensor, again, Greg's given that advice, I suppose, and that I don't think it's something we can condition. We absolutely could include it as an informative. And Chair, I'd suggest that once the debate is finished, if we included the informative, the condition to 9:30, and once the debate is concluded, we would suggest other conditions prior to the vote, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mike, and I appreciate that. Anything else to add, Councillor Bound?
I was just going to say that, I mean, the other councillors have very eloquently put why it should go ahead. I mean, the fact that it's operational without lights between September and April and September, and it's going to be fully used with all the apparent noise coming from it. And in the winter time, I should have thought it would be used less, albeit it's got lights. I read the report with some scepticism, should I say. And I fully support the motion for approval.
Thank you very much. Councillor George, is it quick? No, you double clicked.
Clicked again. I understand that, and given that the only reason for refusal is a noise, the only issue I've got is really that it's mentioned that it's a substantial noise, and I'm just wondering, in terms of reason for approval now, how do we overturn the fact that, you know, the officer report says this is substantial? How are we going to overcome that? It seems to be a bit of a problem here. I don't know. Can we suggest some mitigation measures? I would suggest, in the fact that 9:30 is suitable mitigation measures. How do we overcome that?
Okay, Mike.
Thank you, Councillor George. Yeah, effectively it is that you would be saying that if you were voting with that condition to 9:30, you'd be saying that in the committee's view means that the will not be so substantial, I guess, and therefore would be in accordance with policy EM10 of the local plan.
Yep.
Taking account of the benefits of the mugger and everything else that has been discussed in this debate.
Right, that's end of the debate. I'm going to take Councillor Saunders as moved the motion, And I'd now like to go back to Mike. It's been moved and seconded, and we'll go through the list of conditions, including the informative. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the motion is for, with the condition that lighting will be until 9:30 only, informative to suggest to the applicant that they include sensors to ensure that it's, the lights are effectively off when not in use. And I believe Gemma will add suggested other conditions as a list.
Thank you. Yeah, so I would also suggest standard condition to require accordance with the submitted plans, also the standard 3 years implementation time condition. I would also suggest a condition to secure that development is carried out in accordance with the submitted lighting strategy. And also a condition to secure that the development is carried out in accordance with the submitted ecological survey in terms of storage of materials and machinery during construction. Yeah, and then as Mike has already said, restriction of the hours of lighting to 9:30, subject to agreement with the applicants, so that would be delegated back to officers in that respect, with the added informative for automatic switch off.
Thank you very much, Gemma. It's been moved and seconded for approval, given the reasons for approval and the conditions, and I will take go through the list of the members. Councillor Court, for, against, or abstain?
For approval.
For. Councillor Leeks is not there. Councillor Saunders?
For.
Councillor Godison?
For.
Councillor George?
For.
Councillor Frankham?
For.
Councillor Grant?
For.
Councillor McCormick?
For.
Councillor Bound?
For.
Councillor Potter?
For.
Councillor Tomlin?
For.
And I am for. Bernie?
That's 11 for the application.
That's approved, officers.
Thank you. So the application is approved for the reasons that it would not cause substantial noise impacts to the detriment of neighbouring amenity, and also due to the benefits of the wider community.
Right, thank you very much, members and officers on that. Move on to item number 3. This is a PIP. And we've all gone through this several times before, not this particular one, but the Berry Court Farm site we have on various applications, but this is now a PIP. And if I could ask Parish Council Mr. Greaves to check in, please.
Councillor Miller, Mr. Greaves hasn't joined the meeting.
Okay. Now, technical or otherwise, I will leave it open at the moment. Thank you, Bernie. I will then, if he does check in, I'll check it after any other speakers to see if he does join us. Mr. Ellis. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. I see you checked in. If you'd just like to hang fire, we'll get the officers to present the application, and then I'll call you up.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Item 3 seeks permission in principle for the erection of 4 dwellings, for up to 4 dwellings, sorry, on land at Berry Court Farm, Little London. As an application for permission in principle, only matters in relation to location, land use, and amount of development are to be considered. From the site location plan on page 45 of the agenda, members will note that the application site is located on the western side of Silchester Road to the southern part of the village of Little London.
Sorry to interrupt, Gemma. Could you say that page number again?
Yeah, sorry, location plan on page 75.
75, thank you.
It's also, I think, important to note, as set out within the agenda on page 61, there is previous planning history at the site. Application for outline planning permission for 4 dwellings was put to the Development Control Committee in August 2017, and that application was refused. for the only reason being that a locally agreed need hadn't been identified to meet the exceptional criteria of policy SS6E, and there were no other reasons for refusal. If I could please bring members' attention to the update paper. There is a summary of some further representations that have been received on the application. Officers are also aware that members have been sent a letter on behalf of 101 residents, and an officer has also summarised some main comments in response to that within the update paper as well. But ultimately, none of the representations that have been made alter the officer's assessment of the proposals. The main things that I would like to point out from the update paper are that it is for the decision maker to decide what weight be given to material considerations in each case, and in taking all material considerations into account. In this particular application, it's considered that the harms of the proposed development would not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the scheme. The application has been brought to Development Control Committee due to the number of objections received and the officer's recommendation for approval.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ellis, you have 4 minutes.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you here today. My name is Gary Ellis and I represent the 101 residents of Little London who are opposed to development at this location. Unfortunately, this is the 3rd time that I've been before you related to this site. This application is one of 20 to come from Bury Court Farm in the last 7 years, many of which have been retrospective. The site as a whole has the attention of the enforcement team. The previous 2 applications were rejected by the LPA, with the most recent decision upheld by the Planning Inspectorate. It could be argued that this application is a cynical attempt to take advantage of the temporary land supply issue. You will have recently received representations from Dr. Sam Foles on behalf of over 100 residents of Little London, who argues that although the LPA is deficient in terms of housing land supply, the deficit is tiny, 2.8% as of February this year. And the weight afforded to the relevant local plan policies should be proportionate and reflect this. The recent approval last week of the green space at Manydown should take some of the pressure off countryside development elsewhere in the borough, in my view. There is no doubt that this application is against the local plan. The location is adjacent to flood zones 2 and 3, and upstream and adjacent to a critical drainage area. In February 2020, this area was waterlogged. You've all seen the photographs. The plot itself has significant areas of surface water, the runoff from more development only exacerbating this already critical issue. You've seen the water levels in the stream adjacent to this land and were dangerously high, close to breaking its banks on 3 occasions this year. The sewage system was overwhelmed with surface water on March the 6th, flooding the area around the village hall. Thames Water rectified the position, but overall the sewage system in Little London is not fit for purpose and cannot reasonably be subjected to increased flow and runoff. Another separate application at Bury Court Farm was recently refused on the basis that the location is isolated and within the countryside, thereby not considered to be a sustainable form of development, with the harm outweighing the benefits. Notwithstanding this refusal, the applicant has now resubmitted by the applicant's daughter in a near identical form, which is just another example of the continuous assault, industrialisation and urbanisation of any scrap of land related to Bury Court Farm. Specifically, I'd like to highlight 2 near identical PIP applications that have come before the committee, where you were courageous enough to go against the officer's recommendation for approval. The first was the development of 4 dwellings in Monk Sherborne, which was refused on January the 8th. The second, residential developments of up to 9 dwellings in Sherborne St John, which was refused on the 5th of February. Many other officer-delegated applications for near identical schemes have been refused, primarily for the same reasons. And I'll quote,
have 1 minute.
Okay, by virtue of the amount of development and introducing inappropriate residential development into a countryside location, would not be sympathetic to and would fail to respect and integrate with the character, visual amenity and scenic quality of the local landscape. Last paragraph, your own landscape team made a response to this application, and they considered, and I quote, dwellings on the proposed site would be incongruous, contrasted with the existing linear pattern of development confined to the eastern side of Silchester Road, where properties face on into uninterrupted length of narrow country lane with continuous hedgerow and fields behind. We urge you to acknowledge the wishes of the community to protect our village, to ratify the view of your landscape team, and acknowledge that this site is fundamentally unsuitable for development. We therefore request that you refuse this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ellis. Members, any questions for the speaker? Nope. Thank you very much, Mr. Ellis.
Thank you.
Could I have Mr. Pettit, Mr. Snook, please?
Can you hear me?
Whoever's speaking, yes.
Sorry, it's Mark Pettit here.
Mr. Pettit, and I see Mr. Snook is on board as well. Between you, you have 4 minutes to address the committee. Off you go.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Mark Pettit, and I prepared and submitted this planning application. The application is recommended for approval, and we fully support this recommendation. As outlined in the committee report, this application is seeking permission in principle for between 1 and 4 dwellings on land at Berry Court Farm. The design components of the scheme, such as the scale, appearance, and layout, are matters that would be considered at technical details consent stage. The scope of this current application is therefore limited to location, use, and the amount of development. It is similar to the application that was approved at DCC in October 2019 at St Michael's Close in North Waltham, and in December 2019 at Pirates Cottage in Highclere. Now, members may recall that the application site formed part of a wider site, which was the subject of a planning application back in 2017. This sought outline permission for the erection of 4 detached dwellings, a village green, and a car park. In that instance, the council and a subsequent appeal inspector did not support the principle of residential development in this location. They did not consider that the proposals would meet a locally agreed need, as per the requirements of policy SS6E. That was the only main issue, though. This current application has been made against a different backdrop, as the council accepts that they can't currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land. As such, the presumption in favour of sustainable development is engaged accordingly, and the requirement to demonstrate a locally agreed need is no longer necessary. With this in mind, there are no policies in the NPPF that provide a clear reason for refusing permission in principle in this instance. The site does not fall within the AO&B or a conservation area, and there's a generous distance away from the nearest listed building. Furthermore, the site boundaries have been drawn to ensure that the proposed dwellings will sit outside the flood risk zone to the north. Highways have raised no objection to the proposals, and following additional ecological work being undertaken, the council's biodiversity officer now raises no objection to the application. Whilst the landscape officer has expressed some concerns with the application, as outlined in the committee report, the character of the immediate area is dominated by the existing residential properties on the opposite side of the road, the solar park to the south, and Berry Court Farm and Business Park. In short, the site is well related to the built-up area of the village. No overriding concerns were raised from a landscape point of view back in 2017. Any landscape impact will be localised. We believe that the erection of 4 houses fronting out onto Silchester Road will sit comfortably in this location and respond successfully to the pattern of development in this part of the village. In terms of whether the site is isolated or not, we agree wholeheartedly with the planning officer's position. This is clearly not a site that is physically remote, and the previous appeal inspector's decision confirmed that there were no concerns in this respect. Little London, with over 600 people on the electoral roll, does have a community hall and a pub. No other services are available in nearby settlements. The nearest bus stop is less than 300 metres away from the site, so well within walking distance, and provides an alternative to using the private car. Indeed, the service provides connections to Basingstoke, Tadley, Sherfield-on-Loddon, and Bramley, where a more comprehensive range of services and facilities are available.
You have 1 minute.
In summary, the site is considered to be an appropriate location for up to 4 dwellings. The council concede that they cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land, a situation that could become worse with the existing nitrate issue in the borough. In this respect, the proposed development would make a small but worthwhile contribution to the council's supply on a site that is not within the AO&B, a conservation area, or a flood risk zone. Furthermore, as the proposed dwellings would not be isolated, the location wholly accords with the framework that seeks to promote sustainable development in rural areas by encouraging homes to be located where it will enhance or maintain the vitality of rural communities. At technical details consent stage, every effort will be made to ensure that the new houses are sensitively designed, make a positive contribution to the street scene, and do not compromise the character and appearance of this part of the parish. We therefore respectfully request that planning permission be granted accordingly, in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pettit. And members, questions to the applicant?
Councillor Miller?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Mr. Greaves has now joined the meeting.
Fine. And as I said in my remarks, due to technical or other issues, I'm quite happy as there are no questions. Thank you, Mr. Pettit, and thank you, Mr. Snook. I will now invite Mr. Greaves to join the committee meeting. Mr. Greaves, good afternoon.
Right,
He's gone.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, Mr. Greaves. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know what went wrong there, but we seem to have a bit of an echo as well. So good afternoon. My name is Simon Greaves.
Sorry, Councillor Greaves, I believe you're representative of the Parish Council. Good afternoon. You have 4 minutes.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Simon Greaves. I'm the Vice Chair of Pamber Parish Council and a resident of Little London. The Pamber Parish Council's decision was to and is to object to the proposal and reflects the local desire in the community that this application is refused. We object for the following reasons. The development is outside the settlement boundary. There is no demonstrated local need. There is a loss to the countryside, a point reflected by your landscape team. Utility services are stretched to its capacity and would struggle to take additional load. There is local experiences of this. The site is adjacent to a flood risk area. Surface water drainage in the area is disposed of through soakaways. This could increase groundwater levels and therefore add to the flood risk in the location. Increase in traffic will have a detrimental effect on the rural infrastructure, raise the risk of incidents on the road that is regularly used as a rat run to AWE. The site in question has been subject to 2 previous planning applications in recent years, both of which the DCC refused because the site was outside the settlement boundary of the parish and it did not prove a local need or any exceptional circumstances. The second application was then appealed and after consideration dismissed for the same reasons. In the appeal conclusions, the officer stated that, and I quote, "A number of interested parties have raised a series of other concerns about the proposal, but in view of my conclusions on the main issue, there is no need for me to address these in the current decision." I mention this as I believe it is a relevant point regarding this new application. As you are aware, the application is a PIP, permission in principle. It is a relatively new form of application to us. To gain a better understanding of the decision process of the PIP, I and other councillors researched this form of application. We were led to a policy fact sheet issued by MPs in Parliament when debating the amendment to the Housing Planning Bill that introduced PIPs. In this document, there were many references to reaching a decision through involvement with the local authorities and communities, and I quote, "to ensure that the development takes place on sites that people want to see built. You are aware of the local community is opposed to this development." The DCC have also experienced this form of application. You recently refused such an application, 19/02469/PIP, which is in close proximity to this site and is part of the Berry Court Farm estate. Your decisions were that harm would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of up to 2 dwellings. The proposal is contrary to the NPPF on policies SS1 and SS6 of the Basingstoke and Deane local plan. There is no justification for departing from the development plan or the national planning policy framework or any other material considerations such as to establish the principle of development which would be of sufficient weight for the creation of dwellings on this site. I believe this decision could be applied to this application. The sites are of a similar size, but this application is for 4 dwellings.
You have 1 minute.
Finally, once the countryside has been developed, the benefits will be lost.
Thank you very much. Members, questions to the Parish Council? Nope. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Greaves. No more speakers, questions to officers. I have one to start off. Bearing in mind, we do not have a 5-year land supply. I think it was the applicant who said it, then we do not need to take into account local need. Is that correct? Does that requirement fall?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, bear in mind that we can't demonstrate a 5-year housing and land supply. Policy SS6 is considered out of date, which includes a locally agreed need requirement. The MPPF doesn't have such a restriction to be met in these circumstances. So it's the officer's assessment that the proposal complies with the MPPF.
Next question is that we have it's always these sort of 3 elements about the land, but in a PIP we have to look at also, I think the land is one of the criteria. Is landscape a material consideration in a PIP? That's my question.
Thank you. I think it can be in particular instances, but applications do have to be considered on a case-by-case basis. It's notable in this instance that it's not within an important landscape area such as the AONB or anything. And I think it is, to take you back to obviously the previous planning history on the site, the previous application hasn't previously been refused on landscape grounds, and it is the officer's assessment in this instance that there wouldn't be any adverse impact on the landscape to warrant refusal in this instance, but that's obviously for members to debate.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. The question is, I read in the documents, the site is close to flood zone 2 and 3 to the north. Could you tell me how close? Because I can see on the location plan a sort of culvert, river, ditch. Can you tell me how close the actual zone comes to the site, please?
Thank you. I'm afraid I don't have the exact measurements to the flood zone, but I know that it does run along the north part of the site. I'm just going to get the location plan up. Sorry, bear with me 1 moment. So yeah, the flood zone does extend south from the culvert that you can see on the plan. The site itself isn't within flood zone 2 or 3, but it is acknowledged that flood zone 2 and 3 are located within quite close proximity to the site. But in terms of considering land use, the site itself is within flood zone 1, where principal or residential development is generally acceptable.
Okay, okay.
Councillor George. Councillor George.
I've got it. Having problems. I'm particularly interested about this condition about locally acceptable, and given the comments made about what was debated in Parliament, could I just confirm what the council's view is regarding this locally acceptable view, given that particular, should we say, suggestion that was what was debated in Parliament did seem to suggest that it was where people wanted houses to be built. Is there any case law on that, for example?
Thank you. There is a summary in the officer's report within the agenda on page 71 under the other matters section. Officers consider that that this is in relation to an application being considered in line with the relevant local plan and the NPPF, and not to no objections being received from the local community.
It is not considered. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chairman. I was reflecting, I think, on something Councillor Grieve said really regarding the debate that took place in Parliament on PIPs, and I can say it here and now, I'll say it again really, I think it's the worst piece of change to planning legislation, worst change to planning I've known for years, quite frankly, and anyway, that's another story. But in terms of the whole emphasis on locally agreed need being considered to be outweighed by the lack of a 5-year land supply, as I understand that, I mean, that's a matter for our conclusion, is it not really, that we can come to that conclusion that it is outweighed because we haven't got this 5-year land supply anymore, and we can penalise the good people of London, Little London, for the failings of this council if we want to. But you know, it's our decision whether we actually say it is outweighed in that way. And I think the commentary Councillor Greaves gave, what took place in Parliament, really was, having said that, you should still have absolutely minded of what the local community is saying about the sites that may be chosen under this ad hoc PIP arrangement. I've never seen it as an absolute, and I'm of the opinion it gives this discretion to us. And to be frank, we've been brave before on PIPs, have we not really? And said, quite frankly, if we refuse it, go to appeal if you like. I don't know what the outcome of all of that is, but that's as I read it, we have still some discretion on this. That's
Mike.
Do we have some discretion?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Potter. I think just to be clear, I think the two, I'm sure it is clear, but just to be absolutely clear, the two issues are slightly different. One is in reference to the government guidance that was introducing the idea of PIPs, so permissions in principle, and how they should be, the benefits of them, if you like, and how the government saw them rolling out. The other is about locally agreed need in the terms as expressed in our policy SS6. So just to be clear, there are two separate issues in that regard. You're absolutely right, Councillor Potter. It is a matter of, as always, planning judgment for the decision maker. I think the key issue that the report seeks to set out is that the context of the decision has changed, in that the paragraph 11D of the NPPF is engaged because of the current situation in terms of 5-year supply. And I'll just briefly read what it says verbatim, because I think it's just useful to remind. It says that where there are no relevant development plan policies or policies which are most important for determining the application are out of date, it means granting permission unless the application of policies in this framework that protect areas or assets of particular importance provides a clear reason for refusing the development proposed, which isn't the case here. As we say, it's not within a conservation area, it's not within an AONB, it's outside the flood zones, etc. Or any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in this framework taken as a whole. So that is effectively now the policy context within which the LPA, whether that's delegated through officers in terms of delegated decisions or decisions taken by the committee are taken. I think a number of speakers, both in support and against the application, have spoken about other applications, and I would just reiterate, I suppose, the normal advice, which is that each application does have to be taken on its merits. And I think in this case, both through the previous decision of the LPA and the appeal decision, there weren't those additional specific reasons, if you like, for refusal. It was on that sort of principal point around the policy at that time. But as I say, the policy context has changed somewhat in the interim.
Fine, Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just following on from what Councillor Potter said and Mike Townsend said. It appeared to me that the applicant doesn't have to show that there is a need, because we are now considering the NPPF guidance rather than our own policies, and I think it would be difficult on appeal for us to be able to justify the fact that the applicant is not showing a need when he doesn't need to show a need.
Is that a question to officers? You're muted.
I was going to ask the question to Mike whether that is so.
Thank you, Councillor Bound. Yeah, I mean, effectively, it's as set out in the report and in the update paper, that the policies are considered out of date because of the land supply position. That doesn't mean that there's absolutely no weight put to them, but there's very limited weight, and I think you need to consider it in the terms of paragraph 11D that I've just quoted in terms of the NPPF. That is the decision that the committee needs to come to.
Councillor Saunders.
Could I ask, Mike, could you just read the last bit of 11D, which you rather sort of rushed through? Because it did seem to me that if I heard you correctly, what he's actually saying is, if you actually think at the end of the day this is a very silly idea and shouldn't be allowed, and because it's actually going against a series of policies which otherwise would be considered out of date, then that's exactly what you should do. But perhaps you just give us the precise wording so we wouldn't want to get this wrong.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor. So effectively, that second part of 11D is the or. Any adverse impacts of doing so, i.e. granted permission, would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in this framework taken as a whole. So that's the framework, the NPPF itself. And effectively, that is the tilted balance, if you like. So you need to be able to demonstrate that point that any adverse impacts of the development would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So the benefits, obviously, being the addition of housing in a situation where we don't have a 5-year supply.
Any more questions to officers?
If I might, Chair, just to take
yes, go right ahead
on that point, because we see quoted on page 71, section 3 of the NPPF, which reads that the planning system should be genuinely plan-led, which of course is our plan, which is now out of date. But it does also say, and a platform for local people to shape their surroundings. That's what's quoted in that. So do we have a potential conflict within the NPPF here that is really left to us to try and resolve?
I think, Councillor Sanders, I think it's that issue around the quoted part of 11D where it says about taking the NPPF as a whole. So it's that issue that there will be parts that no doubt support things, the principles around plan-led system. But equally, there are other parts which talk about when those plans and policies can be considered out of date. So ultimately, it's going to depend on the situation that's valid at the time of the decision. And at this point, because of that 5-year supply position, those policies are considered out of date, and therefore the weight attached to them is reduced, and therefore that tilted balance is engaged.
Thank you, Mike. Debate. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, yeah, going into debate, picking up on Mike's last point, we probably don't consider that our local plan policies have any less weight. We didn't declare it. It's been a change in the rule of the government that's done it. So we're still trying to be led by the plan. We're still trying to follow what the community want in that plan. And it's the changes, we could argue, we don't consider are valid. And it's us versus NPPF or the planning body, if you like. So, it's someone has to act as a judge, and maybe maybe that's enough. I also mentioned the one other issue that concerns me, and I know it says flood zone. We just had a let's build a house in flood zone 3, and here we've got houses very close to a flood plain, but they're not in it, they're in flood zone 1. But we've had other applications on a very similar thing where the state of the land, what it's not in a floodplain or zone, is in fact boggy for many months of the year. We've had local information on this site about how it's flooding and the sewage problems and the drains bursting with all the extra water. So, you know, one argues there's the suitability of the site. Now, that hasn't appeared in some of the earlier planning questions. I wasn't party to those. I am now, so I'm bringing this up. So I think we've still got room here to argue the case. And as I think Councillor Potter said, it's for the inspectorate to rule upon it at a hearing. I think really we ought to consider standing our ground and, you know, being judged. Anyway, that's my comment so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. And yes, we have had that discussion within this committee in the past, especially in the early days of PIPs, because of the uncertainty. It was new ground, and we are continually in a dilemma over these PIPs because it's I was woolly and fuzzy around the edges, and for a regulatory committee that is a difficult thing, and we come back to judgment again. But I'm sitting here looking at a committee that's got a vast amount of experience, and it's, I think, up to us to decide how these things go on a case-by-case basis. But thank you for that input. Any other contributors to the debate? Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. Try not to repeat some of the stuff I've said. I mean, I have a history of railing against these PIPs. I know that. I don't want to indicate a predetermined position on this one, but the simple fact is that, and I've said it ad nauseum again, you nearly could have just one cover sheet on a PIP application, couldn't you, from our officers that just says, yeah, you know, it satisfies location, use, amount, doesn't exceed the 4 dwellings, QED, you're not giving a outline planning approval, you're just approving something in principle. No more debate on it, really. Well, I don't think that's the way planning should be dealt with, and I think Councillor Tomlin makes some very valid points the way this is being imposed upon local authorities like our own, and that is not good enough. This is in my subjective view, a very poor site on which to site 4 dwellings in this area, and the local community has repeatedly made its view known on this, and I respect that view, really. They've said the same things every time, and quite frankly, talk about if at first you don't succeed, try again in regard to these planning applications, and the other route opens itself up under PIPs. So be it. You know, our politicians have allowed that to happen. I think it's very poor. But in my view, the fact that we are somewhat bound by this fact that we haven't got a 5-year land supply currently, we will have hopefully soon, but who knows, but should not in itself bind us as a development control committee. And I shall vote against this recommendation for approval of this PIP. And, you know, quite frankly, I don't want to get support on that, but I shall. And if it goes beyond that and the inspector has to make a decision on it, so be it. I've said that before, I know, but I don't think this application has much to merit it, PIP or not. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Saunders.
As I think my concern is we have policies, and those policies are there for a very good reason. It's because they were very carefully considered, and they were there to, excuse me, to promote good planning in our area. The fact that because we don't have a 5-year land supply, less weight might be given to them doesn't mean that the values on which those policies were based are any less appropriate. Now, I don't actually believe that it was the intention of the government, and certainly not within the NPPF, to promote bad planning. Nobody is, I'm sure, trying to say that we have to have bad planning in our area, and we have policies which promote good planning, and therefore to just simply sweep them aside, I think, is a dereliction of our duty to the people who have elected us. So I shall definitely be, if Councillor Potter just moved refusal, I shall be supporting him. And if he didn't, I'll move it and he can support me, or whichever way around we wish to do it. But I'm sorry, but I cannot on this occasion support the recommendation.
Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was just to clarify a couple of points from what's been mentioned in debate so far from Councillor Thorne, Councillor Potter and Councillor Sanders. I understand what's being stated, but in essence, what can't be done, it can't be ignored that the NPPF says about policies being considered out of date. Now, I appreciate that that's just the position, if you like. It would to get to refusal. I appreciate entirely that Councillor Sanders has just motioned that, but just need to be clear that effectively it's accepted that the policies are out of date, but the committee would need to consider that the adverse impacts of the development would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits in those terms, and that is the bar effectively that would need to be reached. And I'm guessing from the motion that Councillor Sanders has put forward that is the basis on which that motion is being taken. So it would have to be in that context that decision would be taken, Chair.
Thank you for the advice, Mike, and I'll flip it back to Councillor Saunders. Those words, that framework of words, the choice of words that was put to Mike would be the basis upon which you would put this forward as a reason for refusal.
I think it would be almost exactly what Mike has said.
Yes.
Put into the correct order, if you like, in terms of making the case.
Yes.
That in accordance with the NPPF, harm would be done were this planning application to proceed. And I think we should then bring in some of the other questions about the suitability of the land or whatever, if that is appropriate. But Mike pretty much had it there. He's rather better at phrasing these things than I am.
Mike?
Yeah, I think again, listening to the motion being put forward, I think it would have to be around effectively that previous reason for refusal that the council put forward, and given the material consideration of the appeal history, it is around that previous reason for refusal regarding the insufficient justification for the development, and the fact that there's a lack of locally agreed need, etc., and that the benefits of the scheme, so the additional housing, in effect do not outweigh that impact in terms of the kind of plan-led system. I think our advice in terms of an officer team, in terms of the report, is very clear here, Chair, and it's up over to the committee to decide how to proceed. But that is the basis, I think, on which the motion, if I've understood Councillor Sanders' point correctly, would have to be framed.
Right. I think we'll have to take advice from officers about the actual wording of this. But essentially, would you support that kind of wording, Councillor Saunders?
Yeah, I think so. I'm particularly bringing in the previous, the track record of our approach to this in the past is important, because we cannot forget what we've done in the past. So Mike's phraseology around that was very helpful.
Okay, thank you. And you happy to continue seconding that, Councillor Potter? I'll come back to you in a minute, Councillor George.
I am, Chairman. I think we start off, do we not, in just saying we don't consider this to be in accordance with paragraph 11D of the NPPF, and then we develop that, in terms of the much more technical explanation that Mike's given, and then obviously Councillor Sanders and myself will be happy with that. I think. Thank you.
Fine, thank you. Councillor George, a contribution?
It's a very minor one, but I'd just like to mention, obviously, it's about outweighing the benefits. My view on this, 1 to 4 housing in the context of our housing land supply is a very, very small benefit. So it's about outweighing it. It's a very, very small benefit. So we don't need much in terms of harm to outweigh a very, very small benefit.
Fair enough. Been moved and seconded for refusal, bearing in mind the discussion we've had with Mike Townsend and his very good advice as to the kind of phraseology. It's for refusal. This is a motion to refuse this application. So it's for the refusal. I know it sounds a bit of a ambiguous. Councillor Court.
For.
Councillor Leeks.
I can't vote because I lost it for about 5 minutes.
Fair enough. Thank you for letting me know on that. I thought you popped back in at one stage. Councillor Saunders.
Staring into your eyes there, Chair. I forgot to unmute myself. For.
Thank you. Councillor Goodison.
For.
Councillor George.
Or refusal.
Councillor Franco.
For.
For Councillor Grant.
For.
Thank you. Councillor McCormick.
Against.
Councillor Bound.
Against.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Tomlin.
For.
For. Thank you very much. Bernie.
8 for and 2 against.
Thank you. That's carried. Officers.
Thank you. Mike might want to just clarify this, but the application is refused for the reason that it would not meet locally agreed need in accordance with policy SS6 of the local plan, and the harms of that policy conflict would demonstrate outweigh the benefits of the scheme.
Happy with that. Fine. Good. Thank you, members. And move on to item number 4. This is Poacher's Pocket. And if I could ask Mr. Cole to check in, please. Mr.
Join the meeting yet?
No. Bernie?
Doesn't appear Mr. Cole has joined the meeting as yet, Chair.
Right. Mr. Waters, is he checked in? Right, Mr. Waters, I see you've checked in. If you'd just like to hang on a minute, I'll get the officers to introduce the application. I'll come back to you in a second. Officers, if you'd like to introduce the application.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for the creation of a first floor living accommodation involving the raising of the roof to form 2-storey dwelling and alterations and extension to the existing garage at property known as Poacher's Pocket, Knights Lane, Ball Hill. There is an update in respect to the application that provides a correction in terms of the dimensions across the property, so the width and the depth. Also noting that the footprint is predominantly contained to the existing footprint, so that inaccuracy would have followed through for the existing property as well. Provides details of one further letter of representation, which is from one of the commentators also within the agenda, who has reviewed a historic planning permission for the development that includes Ivy Cottage. And then provides the officer's comments in response to this representation, noting that the application for the neighbouring 4 properties was considered under a different policy regime just under 20 years ago, and that the current assessment needs to be made in light of current policy, so the current local plan and the current design and sustainability supplementary planning document. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Waters, you are in support of this application. Are you the applicant?
I'm the applicant's agent.
The agent, that's fair enough. Yep. You have 4 minutes. Off you go.
Thank you very much, Chairman, members of the committee. I just wanted to explain how the application proposal has been amended since the initial submission. Several letters of objection were received. These mainly related to the height of the proposal and the potential for overlooking. The points made in the letters were all reasonable ones, and we decided to amend the proposal to try and alleviate concerns. Of those letters, the one submitted by Mr. Johnson across the road from the application property was particularly clear and convincing. He advised that the proposal should not be more than 7 metres tall and that the roof over the existing garage should remain almost as it is. Our amended design reduced the height to 6.5 metres from 7.6 metres, and it was lower than that advised by Mr. Johnson, who'd recommended 7 metres, but in line with what the nearest neighbours had requested, as they had requested no more than 6.5 metres, which is what we've reduced it to. We also removed the raised roof form over the garage, and we reduced the number of Velux roof windows and confirmed that they should be placed at a height that would ensure there would be no overlooking. Following the submission of the amendments to the scheme on the 2nd of June, I understand that there was only one sustained objection, that of Mr. Cole at Ivy Cottage to the east of the application property. Mr. Cole considers that the proposal might cause overlooking of his property and wonders why, when his property was built, it was required to have obscure glass in his first floor windows, and that this proposal does not have a similar requirement. However, there is a clear difference due to the orientation of the respective properties and their gardens. When Ivy Cottage was built, it faced the garden of the application property, Poacher's Pocket, and there was a concern about perceived overlooking of that private garden to Poacher's Pocket. In the proposal before you, the facing windows of the two properties are separated by a distance that the planning officer considers acceptable, particularly as they do not directly face each other. Also, the application property does not look into the private garden of Ivy Cottage, as this is out of view beyond that property. I feel that we have worked hard to make significant amendments to the proposal, and your officers are satisfied that it is acceptable. It is an attractive design, and we hope that you will feel happy on balance to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waters. Members, any questions to the applicant? Nope. Thank you very much, Mr. Waters. Bernie, Mr. Cole checked in.
Yes, Mr. Cole's now joined the meeting.
Right. Mr. Cole, good afternoon. You have 4 minutes.
Oh, good afternoon. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to put my concerns regarding this application to the committee. I am the resident of Ivy Cottage, which adjoins the application site. I've submitted my concerns in writing and also attached some supporting drawings and documents. However, the key points of our comments are regarding the issue of overlooking of our property from the proposed extension to Poacher's Pocket, in particular from the first floor bedroom 1. At the time of construction of Ivy Cottage, the planning authorities imposed some conditions on the building when granting permission for the construction of Ivy Cottage. The planning conditions imposed on Ivy Cottage considered the issue of overlooking from Ivy Cottage to Poacher's Pocket to be sufficiently important to require the restrictions of any openings in the west and north elevations of Ivy Cottage in order to protect the privacy of the adjoining property and prevent overlooking. The planning committee also considered the overlooking issue sufficiently important to require any windows or roof lights at first floor level on the west elevation of Ivy Cottage to be glazed in obscure glass, again to protect the privacy of the adjoining property and preventing overlooking. As a result of these planning applications and restrictions, the design of the first floor of Ivy Cottage was amended. A window on the west elevation at first floor level was removed and was replaced with a dormer-type window on the north elevation to prevent overlooking. A roof light in the west elevation on the first floor bedroom was revised to be fitted with obscure glass. All of these modifications were put in place to protect the privacy of the adjoining property, Poacher's Pocket. It seems difficult to understand now why it was considered that there was an issue of overlooking from Ivy Cottage to Poacher's Pocket that warranted these planning conditions at that time, but there's now not an issue of overlooking from Poacher's Pocket to Ivy Cottage to be considered now. The planning officer's report states that the distance between Poacher's Pocket and Ivy Cottage is 20 metres, including the offset. However, at the time the planning conditions were imposed on Ivy Cottage, the distance between the two properties was 27 metres, and it was still considered that overlooking was an issue which warranted planning conditions. Poacher's Pocket had a ground floor extension added in 2004, which reduced the distance between the two properties to 20 metres. The planning report also does not appear to take into account the fact that the ground level slopes away from Poacher's Pockets towards the east, and that the proposed first floor extension will be higher than Ivy Cottage, increasing the level of overlooking. At the time that the planning conditions were imposed on Ivy Cottage, Poacher's Pocket was a single-storey building, and it was still considered that overlooking was an issue requiring planning conditions to be imposed. As we stated in our written submission, we think that it is only reasonable and fair that the protection from overlooking that was previously granted to Poacher's Pocket should now be granted to Ivy Cottage, and that the openings in the south and east elevation of the proposed development, particularly in bedroom 1 at first floor level, should be restricted in the same way.
You had just under 1 minute.
The parish council are familiar with the site and the relationship of the two properties, and they have shared their concern of overlooking. Hopefully I've expressed my concerns clearly, but if there's any questions that I've raised, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cole. Members, any questions to Mr. Cole? Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Cole, if I'm looking out of bedroom 1 of Poacher's Pocket, I'm going to have a lot of difficulty, I feel, in seeing Ivy Cottage unless I'm deliberately doing it. Would you take that as being correct?
No, I think one of the illustrations of the drawing I sent through shows the relationship between the bedroom 1 and the garden inside of Ivy Cottage and the downstairs living room window. Someone said that to me before, but you have to look deliberately. But I think if you're looking out of a window, you're not just looking at straight lines. You're looking at a sort of a view of maybe 140, 180 degrees. So it's not difficult to look to one side and look into the garden of Ivy Cottage and into the building itself.
Any more questions, members? Thank you very much, Mr. Cole.
Thank you.
Members, questions to officers? None. No questions. Debate. Councillor Saunders.
I offer this, Chair, as the ward member, and I am familiar with the properties involved down Knights Lane, not least because we seem to have a never-ending stream of planning applications very frequently to do exactly what is proposed with this planning application, which is to increase the height and to make it into a house rather than a bungalow. Having looked at the site there and bearing in mind that there is an extant permission which has been granted on the opposite side, on the north side of this particular property, for exactly the same thing to happen, I'm quite relaxed about the ability of this building to fit into the street scene and to not look out of place at all. And in fact, I think, without wishing to be impolite about this particular property, it isn't actually one of any great architectural significance. It's perhaps the nicest thing one could say about it. It will be significantly improved by the redevelopment. I struggle a little bit with the question of overlooking. I'm rather, clearly you can see into somebody next door's garden, but then if I look out of my bedroom window, I can see into several people's gardens, and not ones that are deliberately immediately behind me. And that is the nature of the way we are these days. I perhaps should have asked officers just to clarify that, but I think they rather clarified it within their report that that is acceptable. So I really don't see any problem with this as an application, or one would support it.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I was impressed with what I think Mr. Waters said to the committee, really the sensitive and careful way that the applicant, supported by him, has gone about trying to amend the proposal to all the views to them. I mean, I've said this before, really. I mean, I don't overemphasize really the overlooking thing on many occasions. I think people are a bit too concerned with that. I mean, I hope the occupier of this particular property isn't going to spend his or her time in bedroom one overlooking everybody. They must have better things to do, really, and I don't see that as a problem. I really don't. And therefore, I'm very happy to propose the recommendation that we have in front of us, Chair, for this application, and it should be approved.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Do I have a seconder? Councillor McCormick. It's been moved and seconded for the officer's recommendation for approval. Councillor Court.
4.
Councillor Leeks.
4.
Councillor Saunders.
4.
Councillor Goodison.
4.
Councillor George.
4.
Councillor Frankham.
I had to leave the meeting, so I abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
4.
Thank you. Councillor McCormick.
4.
For Councillor Bound.
4.
Councillor Potter.
4.
And Councillor Tomlin.
4.
And put me down for 4 on this one, Bernie.
That was 11, 4 and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. That's carried. Officers.
Thank you, Chairman, to confirm that that is resolved to grant planning permission subject to the conditions contained within the main agenda report. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Just before we leave, I just want to advise you that we've had to time these DC meetings. We were the first committee to kick it off during lockdown to see how things worked, as you probably gather. And the rest of the committees have now settled down to their various meetings, and some of us are on those committees. After the application next week, which is the